The transport shuttle descended through layers of amber cloud, each stratum lighter than the last, until the city of Aethelburg spread beneath us, like a circuit board carved from marble and light. I pressed my forehead against the cold viewport, watching the spires of the Immortal Queen's domain pierce the haze. 20 years I had waited for this moment. 20 years of running, hiding, watching my back in 1,000 filthy ports across a dozen star systems. And now I was delivering myself willingly into her hands. They'll execute you, you know. I turned from the viewport to face my companion. Elara Venn sat strapped into the seat across from me, her arms crossed over her chest, her dark eyes filled with something between pity and contempt. She was my handler, my guard, my escort to the gallows, depending on how you looked at it. The Resistance had given her one job: deliver me to the capital, make sure I didn't run, and report back on what happened next. I know, I said. They'll make it public. A spectacle. The Immortal Queen hasn't had a good traitor to execute in decades. She'll drag it out for weeks, maybe months. Elara's voice was flat, but I could hear the edge beneath it. The anger, the betrayal. And you're just going to walk in there and let her. I turned back to the viewport. The city was closer now. I could see the Grand Promenade, the university spires, the palace of eternal mourning where the queen had ruled for 3,000 years. 3,000 years of absolute power. 3,000 years of watching empires rise and fall while she remained, unchanged, unkillable, untouchable. I'm not walking in to die, Elara. Then what are you walking in to do? Negotiate? She doesn't negotiate with traitors. She doesn't negotiate with anyone. She's a god, and we're insects, and insects don't make deals with gods. Elara unbuckled her harness and moved to the seat beside me, her voice dropping to a whisper even though we were alone. You had everything, Thorne. You were our best operative. Our best mind. And you threw it away to come here? To bow to the thing we've spent our lives fighting? I looked at her then. Really looked at her. Young. Idealistic. Certain of her righteousness in ways I hadn't been since I was her age, since before the Resistance became just another machine grinding people into dust for causes they barely understood anymore. I'm not here to bow, I said. I'm here to deliver a message. What message? What could you possibly have to say to her that's worth dying for? The shuttle lurched as it caught the final descent beam. Below us, the palace landing platform expanded, ringed by guards in gold armor, their faces hidden behind featureless helms. At their center stood a figure in white, tall, still, radiating a presence I could feel even from this height. The Immortal Queen herself. I turned back to Elara and smiled, a tired smile, the smile of a man who had stopped being afraid a long time ago. A message from someone she used to love. Middle. The throne room of the Immortal Queen was not what I expected. I had imagined gold, jewels, the accumulated wealth of millennia displayed as proof of power. Instead, the chamber was almost austere, white stone, high ceilings, windows that opened onto gardens so perfect they hurt to look at. The only decoration was a single tapestry hanging behind the throne, woven from threads that seemed to shift color as the light changed. It showed a woman and a man, standing together on a hill, watching a sunrise. The woman in the tapestry was the queen. The man was my father. They marched me down the length of the room, my footsteps echoing on the polished floor. 2 guards flanked me, their hands resting on weapon hilts, their movements synchronized in ways that spoke of centuries of practice. At the far end, on a throne of simple white stone, sat Thorne Vance, the Immortal Queen, the Eternal, the last of the first, the woman who had ruled human space since before humanity left its homeworld. She looked exactly like the tapestry. Exactly like every hollow, every painting, every statue I had ever seen. Not a day over 30, with features so perfectly balanced they seemed almost artificial. Hair the color of spun silver, eyes like twilight, deep purple shot through with gold. And a stillness that wasn't the stillness of age or peace, but the stillness of something that had simply stopped changing, stopped growing, stopped being human in any way that mattered. She watched me approach with an expression I couldn't read. Not curiosity, not anger, Not anticipation. Just observation. The way a scientist might watch a specimen enter the lab. The guard stopped me 10 meters from the throne and forced me to my knees. The stone was cold through my trousers. I kept my eyes on the queen's face, waiting. So. Her voice was music, low, resonant, perfectly pitched. The traitor returns. I said nothing. I have watched you for 20 years, Thorne Vance. She spoke my name like she was tasting it, testing it for flaws. Your little rebellion. Your little victories. Your little defeats. You've been a thorn in my side since before you grew facial hair. And now you walk into my throne room and kneel. She tilted her head slightly. Why? To deliver a message, Your Eternal Majesty. A message. A flicker of amusement crossed her features. From your resistance? Do they think I will read their demands and tremble? Do they think? Not from the resistance. I interrupted her, which made the guard stiffen and the queen's eyes narrow slightly. From someone else. Someone you haven't thought about in a very long time. I reached into my pocket, slowly, carefully, because the guards had already tensed, and I didn't want to die before I finished, and withdrew a small data crystal. It was old technology, pre-Imperium, the kind of thing they didn't make anymore. The kind of thing that had to be passed down, preserved, protected. My father asked me to give you this, I said. On the day he died. The change in the queen's face was subtle, but unmistakable. For the first time in 3,000 years, something human flickered behind those twilight eyes. Something that might have been pain. Your father, she repeated. You are. His son. Yes. I held up the crystal. He told me to wait until the time was right. Until I had something you needed to hear. Until the moment when delivering this message would matter more than anything else in the universe. I looked around the throne room, at the guards, at the tapestry, at the woman who had outlived everyone she had ever loved. I think that moment is now. The queen rose from her throne. She moved down the steps toward me with a grace that wasn't quite human, too smooth, too fluid, too perfect. The guards stepped aside as she approached, their training warring with their instinct to protect her from a potential threat. She stopped 3 feet away and held out her hand. I placed the crystal in her palm. For a long moment, she simply looked at it, turned it over in her fingers, remembered, perhaps, the hands that had last held it, the voice that had last spoken into its memory. Then she closed her eyes, and the crystal began to glow. Middle continued. I don't know what the message contained. My father never told me. He only said that when the time came, I would know, and that the queen would know too. That the words on that crystal were the last words she would ever hear from someone who had loved her before she became immortal, before she became a god, before she became the thing the galaxy feared. I watched her face as she listened. At first, nothing changed. She stood perfectly still, the crystal clutched in her hand, her expression frozen in that same unreadable mask. But then, slowly, almost imperceptibly, something began to shift. A tremor in her jaw. A softening around her eyes. A single tear that escaped the corner of her left eye and traced a path down her perfect cheek. The guards saw it too. I heard one of them shift his weight, heard another's sharp intake of breath. In 3,000 years, no one had ever seen the Immortal Queen cry. No one had ever seen her show any emotion at all beyond cold amusement or colder anger. It was said she had forgotten how to feel, that immortality had burned away everything human until only the throne remained. But she was crying now. The message ended. The crystal's glow faded. The queen stood motionless for a long, terrible moment, her hand still extended, her eyes still closed, that single tear still glistening on her cheek. Then she opened her eyes and looked at me. You are his son, she whispered. I can see it now. The shape of your face. The way you hold yourself. The stubbornness in your jaw. A ghost of a smile touched her lips. He always was stubborn. Even when we were young, before the ships came, before the Immortality project, before everything. He would argue with me for hours about things that didn't matter, just because he enjoyed the arguing. I know, I said. He taught me that. The queen laughed, a sound so unexpected that one of the guards actually jumped. It wasn't a cruel laugh or a mocking laugh. It was the laugh of someone remembering something precious, something lost, something she had never expected to find again. "What did he say to you?" I asked. "In the message. If you don't mind my asking." She looked at the crystal in her palm, then back at me. "He said he forgave me. For choosing immortality. For choosing the throne. For choosing power over love." Her voice cracked slightly on the last word. "He said he understood why I did it, even if he couldn't accept it. And he said—" She stopped, swallowed, continued. "He said he had waited his whole life to hear my voice again, and since he couldn't, he wanted me to hear his one last time. To remember that someone in the universe had loved me before I became this." She gestured at herself, at the throne, at the tapestry behind her, at 3,000 years of loneliness wrapped in the shape of a woman. "I called you a traitor," she said softly. "When my guards told me you were coming, when I read your file, when I saw how many of my operations you had disrupted, I called you a traitor to your species, to your cause, to everything your father believed in." She met my eyes. "I was wrong. Was I?" I asked. "A traitor, I mean." The queen was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was different, softer, more human than any sound I had ever heard her make. "You came here knowing you might die, knowing you probably would die. You came to deliver a message from a dead man to a woman who has forgotten what love feels like." She reached out and touched my face, her fingers cool against my skin. "That's not treachery, Thorne Vance. That's the bravest thing anyone has done for me in 3,000 years. Ending." She released me. Not symbolically, actually, literally released me. She ordered the guards to remove my restraints, to step back, to give us space. They obeyed with the mechanical precision of those who had long ago stopped questioning her commands, though I could feel their confusion radiating like heat. "You could have killed me," I said, rubbing my wrists where the manacles had been. "You could have executed me publicly and made an example of me. Why didn't you?" The queen returned to her throne, but she didn't sit. She stood beside it, one hand resting on its arm, her eyes fixed on the tapestry behind it, on the image of herself and my father, watching a sunrise that had happened 3,000 years ago. "Because I am tired," she said. "Tired of being a god. Tired of being feared. Tired of ruling an empire I never wanted, over people I don't know, in a galaxy that has forgotten I was ever human." She turned to face me. "Your father's message reminded me of something I had buried so deep I thought it was dead. It reminded me that once, before all of this, I was just a woman who loved a man, who laughed with him, who dreamed with him, who cried with him when things went wrong." She walked toward me, stopping close enough that I could see the gold flecks in her twilight eyes. "I cannot undo what I have done. I cannot give back the lives I have taken, the worlds I have crushed, the centuries of suffering my name has caused. But I can stop." She looked at the guards, at the throne, at the tapestry one last time. "I can stop." "Stop what?" I asked. "Stop being the Immortal Queen." She smiled, a real smile, the first real smile she had worn in millennia. "I don't know what comes next. I don't know if I can be human again, or if that part of me is gone forever. But I know I want to try. I know I want to find out." She pressed the data crystal back into my hand. "Take this. Keep it safe. And when people ask you what happened in this throne room, when they call you a traitor, when they question your loyalty, when they doubt everything you've done, tell them the truth." "What truth?" "That sometimes the greatest act of loyalty is reminding a lost soul who they used to be." She touched my face one last time. "Your father would be proud of you, Thorne Vance." "I know I am." She turned and walked toward a door behind the throne, a door I hadn't noticed before, leading out into those impossible gardens. The guards started to follow, but she raised a hand without looking back.
No.
I go alone. And then she was gone. I stood in the throne room for a long time after she left, the crystal warm in my palm, the weight of 3,000 years settling around me like dust. Eventually, Elara found me there. She had been waiting outside, expecting to hear my execution announced, expecting to watch me die. "What happened?" she whispered, staring at the empty throne. I looked at the crystal, at the tapestry, at the door through which the Immortal Queen had walked into a future no one could predict. "She asked about my message," I said. And for the first time in 3,000 years, she listened. We left the palace together, Elara and I, walking out into a city that didn't know yet that everything had changed. Behind us, the throne sat empty. Ahead of us, the future waited, uncertain, terrifying, and for the first time in anyone's memory, full of possibility. The Immortal Queen was gone, but Seraphine, the woman she used to be, had finally come home.